Welcome to the ATA podcast, where we talk to former elite athletes sharing their insights and wisdom derived from successfully transitioning into life beyond the game. A very warm welcome to the Athlete Transition Accelerator. As usual, Carl and I are exploring the journeys of former elite athletes, where they are today, and what steps they took to reach that point. And I'm delighted to say we're joined today by Don Armand. And Don, we always ask people for a little reflection to kick things off about their career. We obviously are looking at life beyond sport, but it'd be remiss not just to set the scene and look a little bit at that time in elite sport. And I'll throw that question to you in a second, but there's some fabulous highlights to choose from. A stellar career, many years in the English Premiership, nearly 200 games with Exeter Chiefs, winning the Premiership title, winning the European Heineken Cup, getting capped by your country. So there's a lot to choose from. But if you had to pick out one or two of the highlights of your career, the journey, things that now that you've hung up the boots, you look back on, what gives you the greatest sense of pride when you reflect?
It's a good question, because what context do you go? Do you know the context that everyone knows or the context that no one knows?
Well, let's do either one, whatever feels
it sounds
right.
bad. No, I mean
the
school stuff. I mean the school stuff, guys. No, I suppose it's like you try and think about at the very beginnings, the things that kept you going, that you look back on, you're like, that was a special moment. So from a personal perspective, was probably my first team game at school. So I come from like Marisburg College, it's 1,200 boys. It's like rugby renowned. They had like good rugby pedigree, like coloring in your boots black. So everyone played in black boots. The night before, you're there at the school polishing them. You're all singing a war cry. Just like it's really old school rugby stuff. And so you spend your whole school career, trying to play rugby, trying to make sure that you're doing the best so you can be first team, so that you can run out onto the pitch, and it's all that the specialness that comes with it. But my first game was away against a team called Pretoria Boys High, and I don't think I did that much in the game. There was one line break I had off the back of a line out, set up, got tackled after by fullback and that kind of stuff, and we ended up scoring a try off the back of that. And we won the game. So Pretoria Boys was they were like top of the pop. So like playing an Afrikaans school as a predominantly English school, that was a huge victory away. And then I get subbed off. And then after the game, whistle goes, and all my friends in the school come and like chuck me up on their shoulders. Like where everyone's got you and they're bouncing you up and down. And I was like, as I was getting that done, I was like, is this really happening? Like me? Because I was like, you got that first game nerves. Should I be here? Am I good enough? All the things that come with it. And that was a really core memory of like, okay, maybe you do enjoy this game and maybe it's not so bad to go through it. And then probably coming all the way through, university, I had an amazing team, lots of highlights. Stormers, the stuff that we did and winning the Currie Cup. And then, but I'd probably say Chiefs has been some fantastic highlights. But I would say it would be that first final that we won, simply because it wasn't just a final, it was an extra, it was overtime, it was winning. And just the performances that everyone put in there, like the bloody blisters that no one even sees about, the drugs testing afterwards, the celebrations and everything goes with it. Like that'll always be a really special memory for me, I think.
Fabulous. And I love the first half of that answer in terms of it's a common reflection, because that reaching the first team, it's a long journey, isn't it? You see it, you're close enough to touch it as you work your way through the age grades, but it's the sort of pinnacle of many years. So it's lovely that you took it back to that early point. And I always, when people come alive with energy and passion, you can see you reliving that and the energy shining through you as you recounted it. So we could talk for hours about your career, and there's so many fabulous things in there. But I suppose the really interesting aspect for people that are preparing to transition or exploring what that might look like is, what are you doing now? Would you just give us a bit of an overview of how you spend your time now? I know you've got a couple of different business interests.
Trying to perfect the pitch. So the best pitch that I've come up with so far is I make elephants dance in pink tutus.
Nice. Okay.
That's the other
like, what does that mean? Got nothing to do with it. No, I've got a few things going on. I think it's I'm really trying to make sure that I'm learning as much as I can. So I'm putting to practice all the things that I preach, where it's like just as important to know what you want to do as what you don't want to do. So, my wife's a chartered accountant. She's got her own business. So trying to learn to support and create time for her to be able to grow that business, because it's quite an intense business to have.
Mm-hmm.
Balancing that with family time. I bought my own business, which was a leadership development business. But then just the learns that are in that have been incredible, because I still find it funny that leadership is meant to be keeping things simple and creating direction and alignment, and yet nobody knows how to define leadership in a way that everyone agrees upon. So then you're learning about personalities and people, and then you realize how complicated we all are, but how simple we are at the same time. And that's where it becomes very interesting from the leadership perspective, is like how much you actually do have to know or understand to lead people well, because you can't just lead your way. And then it's finding the balance between, those that can't teach. And I'm like, oh, is that like, I don't want to just be here teaching. So I want to do something. So I'm also trying to, like, while I've got my Samson Armand business going, what else can I do to make sure that I'm implementing those teachings and those things, so that I have those real life experiences on top of, everything I learned within rugby and within teams.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's just trying to balance that all out, not becoming the busy fool, but also not falling trapped to the people that say, focus on just one thing and make it the best. Because, like, yes, I agree, but I also think the enemy of clarity is clarity.
Right, interesting.
When you're too laser focused, you miss out on a lot of other things. And so I suppose I'm just trying to learn as much as I can, for as long as I can, until there is a point where it just sings, be laser focused on this, and then go with that. Because, it's a fascinating world at the moment.
So just on the buying the business bit, I know, Carl, you were going to jump in there. Apologies, but just the buying the business, I love that, because there's a real interest from the people we're talking to, Don, around entrepreneurism and that entrepreneurial chance to shape your own destiny. Yes, we might go into fixed employment, that's great, but really interested into getting into having their own business. But naturally, there's an ignorance, there's a lack of knowledge that can be overcome. There's a little bit of a fear factor. So the fact that you're in leadership development is exciting. The fact that you actually went and bought a business, how did that come about? Just out of curiosity.
Well, I did have an e-commerce brand. I'm not going to say business so much, called The Gaming Athlete, that I was trying to get going before I retired. And that was interesting, because I got so many learns from that. And then, like, when I retired, I was like, wow, I know nothing about business. I'd never done an MBA. I'd never done any of it. Because, like, people are like, just do it and you'll learn. But they don't tell you the cost of that learn sometimes. And so that was interesting. And I was like trying to do that during COVID and everything. So there was a lot of things that were up against me that I didn't know the gravity of. So buying the business that I did buy, they were one of my wife's clients. And unfortunately, the man that owned it at the time had prostate cancer.
Right.
And it got into his lymph nodes and went into his bones. So it wasn't, he was terminal. He had X amount of months to live. And I was at the point where I'd kind of slowed down the gaming athlete business, because it's e-commerce. You need money, you need resources. I'd spent that all on the wrong things, the wrong people. So I was like, well, how am I going to learn this kind of stuff? Well, I'd like to do some coaching, because I really do like the team stuff and the leadership stuff. And I don't feel like starting from scratch. So I wanted to buy a business that had all the structure in place that I could learn the processes from and fine tune them. And that came up, and I initially said to them, I'll do some work for you. I'll come and deliver. I just want to learn the business. But then they said, actually, we're probably going to shut down, because realistically can't carry on working and taking on clients. So then we were like, no, I'll buy your business. It'd be a shame to see it all go to waste. I've learned so many lessons from just doing that. So I've tried to start a business, I've tried to buy a business, and now just what's next, we'll see.
Love it.
I'm laughing. I'm laughing because you've probably just hit upon all the questions we're going to ask. Just giving us an insight into all of the areas. But you've just hit on some really key areas that James and I were often talking about, sort of in the background, and previous athletes that we've spoken to in this platform have brought up as well. One of the things we love to mention to current athletes is whilst you're in your world and you're still in an elite environment, figure out what you want to do and what you don't want to do. Jump into as many things as you can to identify the no's alongside the yeses. And you hit upon a great point there, what you want to do, or figure out what you want to do and what you don't want to do. And I'm curious to know, sort of, when did you have that mindset during your transition? Was that always something you were aware of whilst you were still playing, or did you figure that out a little bit down the line?
What as in terms of finding out what you don't want to do, or just
Yeah.
doing something?
Figuring out what you don't want to do.
I'd say that that's more recent, because no one ever says figure out what you don't want to do.
Yeah.
They always go, just try things, you'll find out what you want to do. But actually, if you're looking at what you want to do, human nature is we actually can do most things. And if you've been in an elite sport, there's signs on the wall. You can pretty much put your mind to anything and achieve. That's why some guys can get to the top and actually not enjoy the sport, but they have the mindset to be able to get to the top. So that means if you've got that mindset and you put into a business that you think you want to do, guess what? You're going to do well at it, but you're not going to like it. And so that's where I don't know if finding the things you do want to do is the right approach, as opposed to like, just try stuff. If you don't like it, stop forcing yourself, because you're going to make yourself do it anyway, because that was your history. That's why you got to the top. Like, no one likes doing preseason fitness. No one likes doing all that stuff, but you learn to just do it anyway. So if I could even change that, what I just said is like, instead of just finding out what you do want, just focus right now as an athlete on the things that you don't like doing and be very strict on those. Don't take an opportunity just because it's there, or take the opportunity, but give it a timeline of 3 to 6 months. And if you don't enjoy it, don't go through with it, because in 3 years' time, you're going to be like, I hate this. I've got all this money, but I'm so unhappy. I've got this consistency, but it's not worth its salt, because you're going to have to restart and you're still not going to know what you like. And then maybe 10 years down the line, when you've got expenses, resources, responsibilities, people are reliant on you, it's going to be a lot harder to get out then than if you are true to yourself and do it sooner. So yeah.
No, it's good advice. It's good advice. And one of the things, I was looking at your LinkedIn before we started the interview, Don, and you mentioned the gaming athlete, and you had the humility to put in here a journey that is riddled with failure and learnings.
Yeah.
Which I was going to pick up on that. You've mentioned that it's an e-commerce platform, but what just bring that comment to life a bit for us. Riddled with failures and learnings.
Yeah, I mean, I try and I struggle to see why everyone talks about authenticity, but no one actually really embodies it. And like, I could sit here and be like, yeah, gaming athlete was a success. I mean, we didn't quite take off. We had a couple of challenges, but actually, realistically, everything I know not to do is what I was doing then. And so it's riddled with failures, like ineffective meetings, spending money without realizing that I shouldn't be spending it, going in a bit blind, trusting the wrong people because they're not doing your due diligence, and actually not really having a grasp on the detail of what you want to do. So like, I had the passion, I had the vision, I had the where it wanted to be, but what I didn't necessarily have was a realization of like, well, how do we start small? And then how do I make sure I get the right people on board at the right time, and not just get the best people on straight away and then just go, yeah, now they're going to do it. Because that was off the back of the advice of like, get the right people in your team and you won't have to do the work. So I was like, oh, this person's got a load of experience and expertise. Here you go. And he's like, here's the cost. I was like, oh, he must be worth it if it's that cost. All of a sudden, 3/4 of the business loan budget I got went to their salary, and literally no progress had been made.
Right.
Because they know any better. But in the bigger scheme of things, I always say to my wife, is it like, you never know how valuable that lesson is, because if I hadn't learned it then, suddenly there's £1 million on the table and I've wasted 3/4 of that because I didn't learn that lesson back then.
Yeah.
So I've always been able to go, well, that's a good lesson, because it was only 15 grand instead of £750,000.
Yeah.
Because I always see the end point of where I want to end up is a lot bigger than that. So I need to learn the right lesson. So when I'm there, I'm making those right decisions.
No, it's the right mindset. Of course, it's so easy to say in theory from arm's length when you're in and you're involved. But I always, within my coaching, I always say there's opportunity in adversity. You don't want adversity to come to your door, but when you actually step back and say, where do you learn the most? In that sporting analogy, you almost reflect deeper and longer when you've lost. You're trying to pick out the learnings and improve for the future. And business is no different. So actually, recognizing that there will be some bumps and some bangs along the way is healthy. And that's why I appreciate your candor on that, Don, because I think it's important that people recognize you don't just step out of a stellar career straight into the finished article in industry, no mistakes, no errors, and just ride your wave to the top. As you say, it's not authentic, because how many sportsmen or women go undefeated all season, never drop the ball, never miss a tackle, never have a dip in form? It doesn't happen. So why do we have these deluded expectations when we go into industry that it's all going to be one way and just an ever, ascending staircase?
Yeah, that's a great point. Great analogy, actually.
Something that also you prompted on my thoughts, Don, around support. So this isn't about us pointing fingers at any particular clubs or governing bodies or anything like that, but we naturally are enjoying the experience of chatting to men and women in different sports, different countries, different cultures. There's a lot of themes that come to the fore, and one of the constant things that comes to the fore is support. And in some cases, it's very good, but in most cases, it's not the best. And this is why I think it's so important for players to take some ownership and look for the support that can help them, because it seems to me that the landscape is not that well populated with clubs and governing bodies that are doing a lot to help. So again, I'm not setting you up to critique any individuals, but just what was your experience of preparing for life after elite rugby? Was there much support available for you at that time?
So I always go, what's the other side of this, and why is the obvious not so obvious? And I always go, if I owned a business and I employed someone and they were doing what they did and then suddenly they left, I wouldn't then spend money and time making sure that they're okay because they no longer serve my business. And that's on that principle. If you've got business owners running clubs, that's their mindset, which I understand. The difference comes in where in sport, it's you've got guys that are putting bodies on the line, team and glory and all that kind of stuff. So there's a different expectation set while you're in there. And that's why you've got like loyal, like super in, like bought in people, and all of a sudden they're on the out. That actually isn't a good look as a business owner, because the long-term effect of that is all of those past players and current players looking at past players going, well, actually, they don't get sorted out. Why am I going to be playing with an injury when I know that in a year's time, then I'm not going to get the support that's needed for my sacrifice? So I'm going to actually make the decision not to play. And then all of us, because people aren't stupid. So it's just trying to make sure that as we're framing it right, as in, why are we putting governing bodies? Why are we wanting governing bodies and support system in play? It's because actually that makes your product better. That means that your player that's playing on a crooked toe, the cracked cheekbone, and all these things that are unfortunately glorified in sport at the moment, they're going to do more of that, unfortunately, do more of that kind of thing, because they know they are sorted out for the rest of their life. But if you start to show people that, yes, great, while you're my player, I'm going to give you my all, and as soon as you're done, I'm not bothered by you, your player's going to be like, well, I saw what you did with that guy. And as humans, we evolve and we learn. And he's struggling, he's drinking, he's on his own, he's depressed, he's really struggling for support. So actually, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to probably quit sooner than he did, go and start my own business or get a job, because in 20 years' time, I'm in a better space. And so that awareness and involvement of athletes is getting better, because you've got people like what you guys are doing, bringing awareness to it, to a 23-year-old that's going, he's bright, he's switched on. You've suddenly told him that, hey ho, all the stuff you're doing actually isn't getting paid back long term. He's going to be like, well, what's going on here? And so as rugby has got to evolve from the people at the top too. Now, how I found it, I did not feel like there was the support that could have been put in place.
Right.
It was very, very much, but I also wasn't expecting it. So, I went out and bought my own business, and I was trying to like completely make sure I made a thing of my post-rugby career, not off the back of my rugby career, which I think was sometimes to a detriment. So like if I did a talk, I wouldn't talk about rugby, and people were like, oh, we thought you were going to talk about rugby. And I was like, no, but that's not who I am anymore. So I completely shifted away from that identity, which I think in the long term will pay off, because it's done me the world of good. Maybe not necessarily the brand, but in terms of self-confidence and ability to hold my own, that adversity you speak of is like you're trying to really test, do people value you, or do they value what you represent? And actually what I want to be is I want to be valued for who I am and what I represent, not just what I present. because they'll pay you on face value and then stop
Yeah,
post
and
that.
you've just struck on something there, Don. Sorry to jump in, but I think
No, no, it's okay.
you're a very, very articulate answer, first of all, on the support. I think you framed it perfectly. It's very challenging for some of the clubs and the governing bodies to be looking at life beyond the game when they're trying to stay alive and keep the business alive. Having said that, you framed it from a player perspective perfectly about how there is an absolute business benefit to look after those who have worn the shirt ahead of you. So I think that was a very powerful answer. But with you just talking about identity there, that was something that we're very interested in, because that is a phrase that comes up continually with people talking about how they struggle to move from the professional hockey player, the professional rugby player, to an individual without that sporting attachment. And recently, I think even Dan Carter was in the news. We shared an article about him talking about that loss of identity. And I was really intrigued by your positioning there of, I wanted to step away from being the rugby player and position myself immediately as something different, somebody in that leadership space. So that's an interesting perspective. And I think that's to your credit, because a lot of people, I think, struggle with, well, what is my identity? And they're hanging on to their former sporting identity. So that, I suppose, I'm reverberating back what you've already said. But
Yeah.
what were the main challenges for you? Something I was going to ask you, did you struggle with identity? And you've sort of led us into that. What were the main challenges as you hung up the boots and stepped in? Did the business acquisition come quickly? Was that a way to stop it being too arduous a process because you had a new focus? But just interesting to take the clock back as to that moment in time and how you found it from a personal perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even mention earlier, it was like, I've got that identity human brand going, which is all about, it's really digging into who we are, what we're about, and how we get the best out of ourselves. So I've clearly created, it's a course that we sell. I've clearly created that off the back of those experiences. But if you go back in time from my life, moving from Zim because of the farm getting taken, having to create a new identity then. So already being used to that in my life, having my psychology degree and playing rugby at the same time. So already still being used to not fully identifying myself as a rugby player. So it wasn't for me, perhaps maybe that the clues are there, is like, it wasn't a big shift because I never was Don, the rugby player. Well, I may have been for a 2 or 3 year period till I got injured and then realized it's not all what it seems to be. But yeah, coming out of rugby and being able to buy the business gives us a focus. The challenge probably came in is if you cut that identity off, that's that saying of you throwing the baby out with the bathwater, is it stopped me from recognizing the things that made me good at rugby, not because I was a rugby player. And so I wouldn't bring those into my business. And that would mean that I was putting myself on the same pedestal as someone that was starting out as a 19-year-old, not having achieved anything and trying to do a leadership business. Mm-hmm. And that's the frame I put myself in. So it means that, like, you're constantly having to explain your value, which doesn't come across well, and it just doesn't send a good product. So you're having to learn about holding your power, identifying who you are, identifying your value and what you can willingly go into a business and realize what value you actually add, not what value you're supposed to add through the business. Because that authenticity and, like, recognizing that you're in the room and what you represent and how you think on a topic is more valuable than how you can explain a topic that everyone else can just read on their own. Mm-hmm. And that was a shift that I think I didn't recognize I was doing. So you're going into a room and you're explaining, some leadership delivery or something as the tool says. And essentially then you're just being a parrot and you're not actually teaching leadership. You're just helping empower more knowledge, which everyone has a purpose. But actually, if you can take your spin on it, that's what makes that unique. Because if you are hopefully in the leadership development business, you understand same concepts differently, because that's what makes you the leader. And that's what you need to bring forward. So for me, it was about recognizing, I've had to, more so now than in the past, is recognizing what were the things that made me good at rugby. And I don't mean skills, like, I don't mean hard skills. I mean the human skills. And why have I left those behind and not brought them into what I currently do? Why am I trying to restart from scratch? So instead of trying to restart from scratch, as the advice here to people listening is, don't restart from scratch. Try and just scratch away the things that were rugby specific and keep those personality elements, that like determination, communication, confidence bits that you would have had regardless of what sport you played, regardless of what job you did. Take those and then start at that level. You don't have to start from zero.
You've hit on some mega points again, Don. I mean, we could go on so many tangents here. And actually, you've very, very nicely segued into the next area that me and James wanted to sort of hit upon, and that is attributes of an athlete. And again, soft and hard skills. But if you sort of look at the very elite, very often you can say they are resilient, they're determined, they're self-motivated, they have this key ability to be able to integrate into a team and share ideas and communicate effectively. What I'd love to dive into, and you mentioned it there with your soft skills, is specifically if you can give us an insight into what of those soft skills were you able to bring from rugby into your leadership business now, and how do they help you with your day-to-day and your coaching of future current leaders?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm going to frame them as human skills because there's some more sensitive people that won't appreciate you calling it hard and soft. And genuinely it's trying to. I think that's probably a really good point in its own in terms of the business transition. Is you're going to have business owners and people that don't understand the human element, calling hard skills necessary. And this is James, you might have seen this in terms of some of the challenges. And then they think anything else is soft, but they define soft as like unnecessary and it doesn't really help the business. But Absolutely. If you talk about human skills and human capital then and all the kind of things that come in with that, then that's a different way of framing it. And it's like, well, what do you learn from a sportsman that's got the human capital because or human skills, they clearly don't have the hard skills or experience in this business. If you can learn what those are, that's where the gold dust is. So it's, like you said, the resilience, but it's the constant rejection you face from not just your coaches in terms of your team, but the culture of your team and the different teams you may have gone into, how you fit into that team, the different fine systems that you guys have. And it's a lot, or that we had, it's a lot more open and like brutal. So like if you're late, go and do a 5K. I don't want to do a 5K. Well, then, do an ice bath now, go and do something you really don't want to do. So you get exposed to the extremes of rejection and fitting in and community justice, where it's like you can't go to HR, you can't go to someone and complain that you don't agree with how it's done. You literally have those conversations straight, like front on. That's a well-practiced, I know, like you're unaware that you've practiced that for all your years in sport. Going into business means that you can say things as they are, which is one of the most frustrating things to see when you go and help business owners, is that even the business owner knows there's a problem, but he's not or she is not saying what needs to be said. And there's a personal failing in terms of character and courage, but there's also bureaucracy in terms of the red tape and the HR. So it's a double challenge where from sports, the human skills that you'll bring into it is that ability to recognize team, as in what's your part in team? Are you playing here? How's your ego going? As well as seeing other people that may not buy into team as well as you think they do. Because in business, they don't see that because they never had experience of that. Whereas we've had the toxic personalities, we've had the egos, we've had the top performers. We see what it takes to be a top performer and how much extra work they do above and beyond what's just been asked of them. But then in business, that's all equal. So everyone thinks that it's, I'm working this hard, therefore you do. But, you understand that a wing does a different job to a prop, does a different job to a scrum half. They all do different types of fitness. They all get paid differently, but they are happy. They understand their role. Back into leadership's like setting the expectations. We all know what we've got to do. So the human skills about knowing why expectations are important allow you to lead those expectations as well as not be upset when other people are not doing the same things that you do. So it's that understanding of how a team operates as a human skill. It's the ability to have open and honest communication, or it's recognizing that you have to have open and honest communication. Otherwise, it's not going to work, because what you don't know, you don't know. But because you've gone through the team environment, you know how important, like when you weren't getting picked and the coach wasn't telling you the honest truth, that was worse for you than if they said, you're just not good enough right now, go and work on this. And that's kind of the difference, is like you get to see more brutal sides of things in team and bring a softer element of that into the business sense, because it does need to land differently. But yeah, understanding people is probably the biggest one.
and it's another wonderful articulation, Don. And I think this is something that's so powerful for people listening. It's the perfect answer when people say, "Well, what can I bring?" Because wearing my other hat as a coach outside of ATA, but obviously now bringing it back into ATA, I work with a lot of senior leaders and leadership teams. And if I said one of the biggest Achilles heel in all of them is how they communicate, the ability to give and take feedback constructively without taking it personally, without taking offense. And so much time and energy is wasted trying to dance around the proverbial deck chairs and not getting to the nub of, we did this well, we did this badly, what do we learn from it? So one of the biggest advantages that most elite sportsmen and women have is what you've articulated perfectly. They've been in that environment for many, many years. They can drive a whole new standard, a whole new way of operating to the collective benefit of that team and the wider organization because it's very familiar. And so that is a wonderful way to remind people you've already got that. That's not something you need to spend a lot of time develop. It's something that's inherent in you because of how you hold each other to account, the standards that you're expected to bring to the fore. Yeah. And just going back in your journey, something you mentioned earlier about the identity point, which again, I'm just circling back to because it's very powerful that you didn't identify solely as the rugby player. And you just quickly mentioned your psychology degree. Was that something you were doing alongside your professional journey as a player? You were studying alongside the playing?
So I prioritized studying first. So I went to University of Cape Town and I was always like, in Maritzburg College, you're good at rugby. So we went over to Cape Town and got a rugby bursary. So rugby was always enabling me to be able to study at University of Cape Town, but it was always going to be University of Cape Town was an intellectual university, not a sporting one. Like you don't go and study a sports science degree at University of Cape Town unless you're doing it solely for sports science. Whereas I know here, like you get some of the youngsters on a sports science degree and becoming a PT, and you can see it's just supplementing a tick box. Yeah. Whereas, we go and study psychology at university. It was something that was my priority, and then rugby then came. But I did that at the same time. So I was playing club rugby, but we were doing quite seriously because we had a coach that took things seriously, and it just managed to marry up that I got my degree and then started to tap into the professional side. So I had a different route than normal, especially from a South African sense, because you very rarely got club players going into the professional setup. Right. Because they liked your Western Province Institute, your high performance institute players would follow the under 90 or under 16, under 18, under 20, under 21. So they would come through the ranks and then go into the professional setup. Whereas I kind of skipped that, studied, played well enough to then come in with an injury and with one or two of my club mates, and then managed to stay there. So it was always I always knew I had to study. For my mom, to be fair, was like, just make sure you get your degree and play, but your degree is going to be important to get. Yeah. And so I managed to get that and then, grow the rest.
I always like to just explore that because I think one of the pushbacks that you get from athletes, but also from people in industry is a lack of time. People often phrase, I don't have time to do X, Y, or Z, to be a more present parent, to learn a language, to improve myself, to look at life beyond the game, whatever the justification is. But actually, I think one of the blessings and advantages that most elite sportsmen and women do have is time. Yes, there's intense training. Yes, there's a ridiculously intense competition. But if you take a moment and reflect, there is time. And it's using that time wisely, whether it's studying, you did that alongside the rugby, it's a good example. But what are your thoughts on that, Don? Because I think nobody's saying that you have to expect your career to come to an immediate end. When you're in your early 20s, you feel invincible, but it could. Injuries can end it. And we really encourage people to try and utilize that time, not to necessarily do a 5-year degree, but to start exploring what you like and don't like, to start exploring conversations, people you can meet, people you can learn from. Perhaps there's courses, who knows, but starting to build your knowledge library for life after the sport and not wasting some of that time that you do have an abundance of as an elite athlete.
I mean, things that come to mind there is like, unless your sport is going to set you up for life, you're wasting your time not making any progress. And that's the honest truth is that, like, I promise you, there's nothing worse than retiring at 33. If you've got kids and a house to set up and then trying to build up your future, you've chosen a lot harder route. Mm-hmm. the next thing of like, I don't have time or the energy is if you've got time to watch, binge watch any series in the evening as a recovery, you're fooling yourself because I had, lots of conversations around like what gives you energy and what doesn't. TV doesn't give you energy. TV is what I call like zombie mode. So it doesn't take energy for you to watch TV, but it doesn't give you energy. Like very rarely do you ever, or if you have ever, I'm not sure why, it's a bit weird. Get up after a movie and go like, woo, I'm going for a run. I'm so pumped after that. But that's what we do is like we go and we'll watch, every single episode of a series in a week. And that's like, and guys, I know rugby players, I don't know if in your guys' experience, they'll stay up till 1 a.m. watching TV, wake up at 6 and go and perform. So you're either so professional at your sport that you're going to bed at 8 because you're getting adequate sleep. And then I'm like, okay, fine. If you're prioritizing your body, your recovery, you're probably going to make it to higher levels than most others, which means that you will get natural opportunities. But for anyone else that sits in that midpoint of like, yeah, a recovery is boring. I'm recovering when I used to play games. I'm recovering when I'm watching movies or TV, or just recovery is just an add-on extra. Then you need to realize that sitting down and actually learning about personalities, learning about yourself, reading some books, just broadening your horizons those things give you energy because they start to resonate with who you are. And so then you find something that really gives you energy. And it's a mental energy that I'm talking about, not physical. So you can be knackered, sit down and start to read something, and then ideas start to buzz. And then you'll stay up to 2 a.m. because you're like, wow, I'm so excited about this.
Yeah.
That's like, so we talk about flow. Like that, I think is necessary for high performance. I think you need to have something that gives you a different approach so that if you don't make the team, you can quickly go, well, my value isn't me being in the team. My value is who I am. So when I'm in the team, I will make sure it's the best. When I'm not in the team, I will give of my best for the team because I know I'm going back home and I'm working on that business too, because that's also who I am. And I'm also valuable as a dad or a friend and all that. Like, so when you talk about identity, you got to have one core thing that isn't related to anything outside of you. And I'm talking family, friends, father, husband, all those things. If you can find out what that is and what drives you, then you put less stress and pressure on yourself to be picked, and you can perform better when you do. And often the resistance comes in, oh, well, if I'm not focused on it, I'm not going to do well. I'm not going to do as well. And I say it's the opposite. If you've got other things that take your focus, it means that when you switch on, and you are able to perform free of judgment, pressure, fear of losing your momentum that you've built. Because when you're not in the team and if you get injured, oh, guess what? You can go and work on yourself, and that excites you too. And you're fully committed to the team. So when you're in it, you're going to be in it. That's your personality. So work with what you've got. And I just think that the approach isn't contextualized correctly at the moment.
No, I think again, credit to Don. Fabulous answer, and so powerful for people to hear that, because that energy concept is so relevant. And I would add in social media to that. And again, this isn't just talking to sportsmen and women. There's no judgment here. Society as a whole has been sucked into this world of streaming services for TV and social media. And I say the same thing repeatedly, Don. If you come off an hour of scrolling on social media, absolutely fired up to go and take on the world and to go and do a workout or to do something, then that's absolutely fine. But very few people ever come off that senseless scrolling or that box set binge full of energy. And you know when you're on the right track. I had to change my reading habits because you read certain books late in the day before you go to bed, and your mind starts racing, and actually you do yourself a disservice because it's firing you up and you're getting that energy back. But it's different for everybody. Yeah. But I think your positioning around energy and finding something that is beyond just your identity as a sportsman or woman is very, very powerful. I think what we're drifting into here is a bit of a do's and don'ts, Don. I think you've given a really great start to that. Something we always say to people is, whilst you can have the philosophy that life happens to us for a reason, never regret anything, we are where we are. I think if we park that philosophy and just say, well, let's talk to the people that are walking the path behind us, the young players that perhaps envisage a 10, 15-year career of invincibility and endless income, knowing what you know from your journey, if you had to pull out a couple of do's and don'ts that you could share and say, focus on this, do this, minimize this, restrict that to give yourself the best chance of a successful transition into the next chapter. You've talked about energy there, and that's a really powerful start. But what else would you add to that?
Yeah. To keep it as simple as possible is if you're envisioning a 15-year career and you're getting to the top, maximize that, fully go for it. What are you going to do, recovery wise, all that, the things that are pretty obvious. If you want to supplement it without having to create too much added extra pressure of running business and stuff, is focus on the key people that are going to help set you up when you're done, but build that relationship now. So I'm talking like, don't go and get find out who your managing partners and your managing directors, your CEOs, your big key players that say are sponsors at your club or like enjoy sport. Find a way to meet them, find a way to spend time with them, and just ask them as many questions as possible, because you're not trying to sell anything to them at that point. You're trying to like understand how they do things, because if you're in sport, that's probably where your mind's going to be at, as you going to want to get to the top. So if you already can think like them because you're talking to them and you're surrounded by them, then guess what? When you're out of sport and you transition, and they already know what you're about and what your character is, because generally those people at the top, if they're successful, they're looking at your character, not your skill. So if you can show them you've got that character, you get much better opportunities. And if you want to do your own business, guess what? Those people become your best mentors. And then you ask them their advice. And if you want to get a job, they're going to give you the best opportunities at a job because they want your character in. So as much as we can say, go and read books, which is great, you can. Go and understand how to start, like what steps you need to take to start a business. Great. If it doesn't take up too much time and it's something that interests you, go do it. But I'd put those all second to look at who are the power players, look at the people that are successful in the business world or post-life, and just pretend that you're podcasting them and ask them as many questions and touch points with them. If they say, let's go for a coffee, go for a coffee. If they don't say, then ask them. And just do that as many times as you can, even from the age of 20, because the only thing that's different between a 20 and a 30-year-old is, the knowledge that they have. And at 30, you ask those same questions, you'll know stuff. At 20, you ask those questions, it gives you a 10-year head start on that wisdom that you'll create by the time you're 30. And if you get to 35, you've had a successful career, you will seamlessly transition. And you'll probably look at these podcasts that we're on and be like, oh, I'm not even going to listen to that because I know what I'm doing. Do you know what I mean? And that's probably your guys' ultimate
success
goal.
Yeah, that's the ultimate.
Making sure that no one's listening, because you've created such a good platform and education piece that everyone's then jumped to it. In 5 years' time, you've done yourselves out of business. Then
maybe not that quick, but yeah, you're absolutely right.
Give us 10.
I know you're going to come into some of the don'ts, but just on that, there's an American speaker I heard, and he had a phrase that success leaves clues, and I really like that. And being around successful people, there's always something you can learn. Just in our experience of conversations, Don, we advocate that 100%. And there's often that little bit of nervousness. Well, what if they say no? And what if? And you build those perceived barriers. And I always say that it's very much like the junior player, senior player relationship you have in your club environment. There are people that are more senior, more experienced than you, and you're very comfortable at looking at what they do, role modeling the good bits, asking for their advice. That's just part of the ecosystem of most elite sports clubs. It's no different. Just embrace that mindset that you are going to speak to senior players, in effect, in business, and learn from them so that you can be better in that next chapter. And the very worst anyone's going to say is no. And I almost guarantee that if you reach out and say, I admire what you do, I respect what you do, and I'd like to come and have a coffee with you and just ask a few questions and learn, I'd be amazed if anybody ever said no to that. Yeah. So I think,
and if they did, then they're probably not a person you want to have coffee.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So I think that's a fabulous do. Is there anything else on the do's before you move into
one last one? Is if you've got this grand vision of where at the top of your game you want to be, I'd like you to add on another 5 years of that in a non-sport context. So what are you going to do post 5 years? Because if you can bring that into your psyche and your thinking, when you ask questions, you're asking the right questions that lead you to that space. And then you're not scared of rejection, and you're not scared of people saying no. And you also then already are starting to eliminate the things you don't want to do.
Right.
So if you can and it could just be, what type of character do you want to be? It could be what kind, like how much money you want to earn, or it could be if you want to be a business owner or an employee. anything, it doesn't matter, it can change. And it probably should change in 2 years when you know more. But if you can just extend that just 5 years past your career, your sport career, your brain will start to figure the rest out.
I like it. Some clarity on the destination where you're trying to get to.
Yeah.
Yeah, good advice. So go back to the don'ts then. What are a couple of things with the benefit of wisdom and having walked that path? What are some of the things you'd say try and avoid doing?
Accidental mentors. Don't listen to everyone just because they're ahead of where you are.
Right.
And so that's where you start to get their own self-limiting beliefs, their own failures. So remember that they took a route and they failed and then they stopped. And now they're turning to you and say, don't take that route because this is how it'll end up. What they don't realize is they took the route, not you. So they can only give it, and it's not intentional, but they're only giving advice from their point of view. They didn't think about different things they could try. You are different. You can try things and you can fail, but when people give you those limitations, then maybe learn what they did and how they did it, and then do it slightly differently. But you're going to get a lot of people that will give you limitations on any journey you want to do, and don't listen to them. You don't need to. Also, don't give in to the common narratives that are of the defeated. So that's like, if you don't want to drink as an athlete because that doesn't serve your purpose, but everyone around you is drinking, don't give in to that. Like, if you know what it takes in a vacuum, as in like imperfection, then get as close to that as possible, because you've only got maximum of maybe 10, 15 years if you're lucky. Why not make the most of that? Because if you make the most of that, you do a lot more for your future than you think. Whereas if you just scrape by and you do the bare minimum, so in off season, are you keeping yourself active with the active recovery that the S&C sends, or are you just going, oh, what a load of nonsense? In your preseason, are you sticking to that preseason program, or are you going, I don't need to do this? It's just those little things, they all add up, and they often come with the people around you going, yeah, I don't want to do that, or maybe we don't need to do that, don't worry about it. So you start to listen to the wrong people, it will affect the way you see it. And so those don'ts are, don't think that other people's truths are bigger than yours. So if you can have the courage to stick to your own truth and have the courage to do things when everyone else isn't, that's going to help you get further ahead. And that'll probably serve you well with any other don'ts. I'm trying to think what other major don'ts, but it generally always comes.
No, I think that's a great one. I love that concept of an accidental mentor, and obviously we talk about acceleration. It's in our whole branding ethos. We're trying to accelerate people from a place of fear to a place of confidence and excitement as quickly as possible. And I think that illustration of the accidental mentor ties in with that you'll see success and you'll see things you like and you'll see things that you want to put in your proverbial toolkit, but also you'll see things that haven't worked and things that you don't like. So just because people have experienced adversity or difficulty, the benefit is learn from it, learn from their good and their bad, have the time to reflect on it. You don't have any skin in the game. It's much easier to reflect and be objective when you're not as close to it. You gave a great illustration that many, many business owners face. What do you invest in staff? Trying to get the best people, invest in huge costs into them. And that's really emotive, and that'll have been a really challenging period. I've seen that a lot guiding athletes. And one of the ways around that, with the benefit of hindsight, which is easy, everyone's a genius in hindsight, is, well, watch the base salary, but be really aggressive and supportive on the commission structure. So you try and minimize that risk. Now, that's a great illustration. If someone came and sat down with you and had a coffee with you, you'd talk them through some of the things that went well, didn't go well with the gaming athlete, but then how that then ties into your new business. So those accidental mentors, I think, have a part to play. It's a part of downloading knowledge, but what they can't be is a dead end. They can't be that roadblock where you say, oh, well, it didn't work for them, so it can't work for me. Because when you put that in a sporting context, how many people would love to play at the level you played, but didn't quite get there, or would love to represent England, but didn't get there? That doesn't mean it's impossible, just means it wasn't possible for them.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that I think you probably give us on the run of form that you're in the minute, Don, with your insightful answers, you'll probably give us a good perspective here. But we do spend a lot of time talking about the challenge of the transition, because it is a real problem and a lot of people struggle, both in terms of finances, mental health, lack of clarity, understanding the destination. But I think it's important also just to reflect that many, many people make a real success of that next chapter. And so, yes, the buzz of elite sport is hard to replace. Some of the things you've talked about and experienced, that elation in that first team experience in your school through to cup finals and winning the Heineken Cup, it's hard to replace that. But there are different sources of buzz and excitement that come in the next chapter. So when you look at your world now, where does that come from? Without putting any words in your mouth, Don, where does that sort of energy and buzz come from? Where do you derive excitement now that you're not on the field, but you're in your own business environment? What brings that to the table for you?
Yeah, good question. And I think sport for me was external buzz. And what I do now is internal buzz, and it's way better. It's way better.
Right.
So that's where knowing yourself and knowing what gives you energy and being aware of that is going to give you a far better buzz than rugby or sport or anything in front of a big crowd can ever give you. Because it's not like there's no pressure there's no stress. I mean, there's no what's the word I'm looking for? Nervousness, because it's not before a game, but I think you recognize this, James. It's like when you sit down, you start to read a book, you start to think of ideas, you start to connect all the dots and the patterns and the way forward. You get this different type of energy and this different type of buzz that comes, and you're just like, I never felt like this in sport. It was a different type of thing where you've got like that's super excited, finals whistles blown, but for me that was always almost a relief that the final whistle's blown, because you were winning a game by far. The whistle goes, you're like, okay, great, game's over. But if you're just winning, there's that it's almost like survival mode is there, and as soon as your whistle's gone, you can't lose. So then survival mode's done, and you're just like, oh, I feel so good. But it feels so good because you got the relief from the pressure that you've just been under to make sure that you didn't make a mistake. Whereas business is or post sport life, it isn't a whistle. Yes, you're going to be in survival mode, and that's not going to be nice when you're trying to get the salary and provide and all the extra responsibilities. But you will notice a difference when you found something that you love doing, because it's not a relief from pressure. It's a step towards something that gives you energy. So you're almost getting drawn closer to the thing that's giving you energy rather than getting pushed away with the thing that you're trying to avoid.
Right.
That's probably the best way to describe it.
Fabulous. And would I be right in saying that energy is almost limitless, because once you find that thing that's giving you fulfillment, the weekends blow into the weeks. You don't feel a need to motivate yourself because there's always an energy source to keep moving you forward.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'm way busier now than I ever was in rugby. And I'm talking there are 4 young kids. We've got the leadership business. We've got the other brand, which we're trying to get going in terms of digital courses and podcasts. We've got a pool that we rent out that I've got to maintain. So daily maintenance. Then you've got my wife. She's got her practice and she's trying to do things. So you're trying to support her. We got my in-laws and my mom live with us. And so you've just got on all fronts, you've got young kids that you have to get to make sure you're bringing them up while spending time with them, balancing business, balancing family life. And if I went back to me 5 years ago, I used to get home from rugby, oh, I'm so tired, and go and sit on the couch and watch TV. And I look now and I'm like, how on earth am I keeping this up? And it's because there is a different type of energy. And I say to my wife a lot, I said, this is what I think people mean when they talk about, if you find what you love, then it's not work. So I don't feel like I'm just managing to get through day by day. It doesn't mean that there's no challenges. It's the same as a preseason. It's the same as when you're trying to keep fit. You've got to make sure that you're bringing in the right money. That's a different type of stress. But the actual work itself, from my perspective, I've put a lot of work into it. I put a lot of work into finding out who I am, what I enjoy, and being aware of what that is, and just learning to follow that. And once you follow that, it's completely different to what you thought it was. It's almost like you wake up and you're like, oh, this is what that feels like. This is what those people are talking about. So,
and I think that is, hopefully anybody listening, that fires them up, because that is just another wonderful answer, Don, where you say, okay, don't fear this transition. The important thing is to take control of the time you've got to speak to as many people, to your point, to learn, to find mentors, to download as much information as you can, to rule things out, rule things in, narrow down what that destination, you've talked about that 5-year window. The more clarity you have of where you're going, that more likelihood you're going to have to do what you have articulated there, to find something that really lights you up, that drives that fulfillment. And I think anybody that's just listened to your summation of that can be nothing but excited to think, wow, there's a guy who's had a wonderful career, been at the top of the game in professional rugby, talking about how excited he is, how energetic he is, because he's found what he's truly passionate about. And that dovetails into exactly what we're trying to support people to do, Don, to have the clarity to find out what's important, to have conversations, and to step into this final chapter with excitement. Because I think it's another fair summary, Don, that we see a lot of people, we talk to a lot of athletes that are hanging on, that are actually playing longer than they really want to, that are staying in the game because they need the finances. They need to keep paying the mortgage, the school fees, whatever it may be, providing for the family, because they haven't got the clarity of what they're doing next. And I think what you've articulated, again, without putting words in your mouth, would you say it's fair that you can step into transition far more confidently when you've got that clarity of what you're going to do and what's coming next, as opposed to just a great black hole of unknown?
Yeah, and I think we want to caveat that too, is like, even if you don't know what you're going to do, I think that there's definitely a thing in society where 5% of the bad is aired and 95% of it isn't. And so you look at that 5% and then you think that that's the only way that it is. So the transition, it was, and we used to get people coming in and they're well intended, but they go, you're really going to struggle. It's huge like this. You don't go to drinking, don't just hang on. And I was like, why is that the narrative? Why do we immediately disempower ourselves or athletes or anyone thinking that it's going to be a struggle? It's because we look at the one person that did struggle because actually they didn't have any help, or maybe they didn't want to, or they had other issues, and they would have had that regardless of, and we're thinking that that's the case. So I think I don't want to paint a rosy picture either, though. Like, I got it, like, I love what I do and I love the direction that everything's going, but it hasn't been easy. But neither was preseason, neither was getting rejected to not play the first team for the first 3 years of your professional career. Like, you've already been through it once.
Yeah.
So there is no reason that I think any athlete that's made it at any level should be going into transition phase and thinking that they can't do it. It's going to be tough. You're going to have months where you have no idea what's coming. You're going to have months where you feel depressed. Like I do, you go in and out of that, but it's the same in rugby. Like, you have real lows. Like, sometimes you just go, what am I all doing this for? I'm just going to give it and go pack bags at Sainsbury's. Why should I be doing this? And that, like, I've had those, but everyone has that. Everyone in life has that. So we're not special in any other way, but we are special because we understand what it takes to perform. And that's the difference. And I think that we forget that. We put ourselves into normal everyday life, and then we forget that we've already done everything that you need to do to understand how it feels and what the experience is and what practice. And then we put that all aside and we just go, I'm nothing. I'm really struggling. I'm going to go drink. I'm going to do this. Actually, that's a time when you get seriously, like, pretend that this is the preseason, that you've spent 1 year and you got selected, but all of a sudden you know that they're recruiting someone that's in the same position and they're good, but you believe in yourself enough to, like, do the extra fitness, wake up early, do all those things, get serious. Maybe this is the season you don't drink for a bit until you get back onto a position where you know that you're definitely in the team over and over again. And I almost think that that's the way you've got to approach the transition. Is not like it's the end of, but it's almost like now you're using this as a platform to get serious for a year. So don't, if I'm going to be super harsh, don't spend a year pissing it up in the pub. Like, stop doing all the stuff that you were doing when everything was sorted in rugby. You can still in sport, you can still have your fun, but 1 year of serious dedication to setting yourself up, learning yourself, going after lots of different mentors, personalities, things, people that challenge your ego, challenge your idea of perfectionism, like, go build like, get those people to break you down, build you up, because that 1 year is going to have enormous strides for the rest of your life. And by the way, because what else gets added on when you transition? Generally, you're going to already have a kid or two or three. You're going to have a spouse. You're going to have this pressure of being a provider if you're a male, or a female, of like, well, what is it? Are you going to go and work? Are you going to go and own your own business? Are you going to go and strive the way you did in sport, in general life? All of that only gets more. because it's now you're not part of a big institution that's just paying you to pitch up and exercise and work, but you get more autonomy, you get more time back if you want it. So it's like, don't look at that first year as something that you're going to take the foot off the gas and just relax. That for me, that first year or year and a half is like, just go after everything. You'll discover the energy, you'll learn, you'll make mistakes, you'll fail, you'll feel despondent, you'll get rejected, you'll hate it, you'll disappear from the world for a week. But I think at the end of the day, just make sure you keep showing up in whatever form. You don't have to show up perfectly. You don't have to show up with a six-pack every time. Like if you've got a dead leg or a strapped knee, or you've got one stud missing in your boot, as an analogy or metaphor,
Yeah.
like just keep showing up, because that's the only way people start to take you seriously.
Yeah. Wonderful. Absolutely. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, Don. I think the wisdom you shared has been superb. And the whole raison d'etre of what we're doing here is to open people's eyes to possibility, to see the success stories, to embrace the fact that they can be challenged. But you've framed it with so many fabulous metaphors, and it's very aligned with our analogies that, no season is perfect. You have good games, bad games, good performances in different performances, but you keep going. You don't just quit because you've had 2 bad games or 1 bad race or 1 bad match. You keep going, and it's that resilience and that perseverance that you're alluding to there, particularly in that immediacy of transition, that punches you through to the other side. So, I mean, Carl, I know you're nodding, smiling. We're both, as usual, taking loads of notes. There's wisdom coming at us from left and right. Is there anything that you want to put to Don?
I think just one thing that we learnt last week, actually, we spoke about it this morning as well, is everybody that lives within the elite world of sport, there's the fear of what comes after. It's a little bit unknown. I don't know what's coming. And is this first chapter going to be the best part of my life? And actually, the second chapter, what comes after sport, is going to be much longer. And I think it was Seb de Chavez mentioned this last week. Who's to say that your second chapter isn't going to be your best chapter? And as soon as he hit that, it was like a light bulb for me. And I think you're living that right now. You're a testament to this, when we can see, when you're talking about your buzz, you can clearly see that the way you talk about what you do now is exactly what you should be doing. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that whole notion of, who says your second chapter isn't going to be your best?
Yeah. No, I take the analogy of, I can't remember where it comes from, but there was someone passed this message on. They said they saw a guy doing a talk, and he said, life happens in 3 peaks. So you've got to decide, which is your peak and how many have you got to go. So you generally have a peak, then you drop, then another peak, and then another peak. And I love that, because I'm like, okay, is rugby my first peak? Or I've actually gone, rugby was my first peak. So that means I've still got 2 peaks ahead of me. So I've got to do everything I can to make sure that my next chapter is bigger and better than my first one. Because realistically, I know I talk a lot about ambition with my wife, and the downsides to ambition, and it can stop you from appreciating. But realistically, I also know that, that's what made you a good athlete. That's what makes you want to do good sport, is you're ambitious. So instead of trying to fight your ambition, learn to work with it and go, okay, I am going to be more successful. I'm going to have to put more work in. I'm going to have to work harder, longer hours, whatever it is. But I'm going to take my lessons from sport, which was rest and recover and perform, rest and recover and perform. So actively trying to make sure you're not burning yourself out. And that's the way you subside the ego and ambition, because you're actively just going, okay, I'm just in a little status quo now. I'm going to just chill out. I'm going to stop working so hard on the business. I'm going to pull back my hours a bit, and then I'm going to go again. And once I'm in, now I'm in performance week. And so it's just taking those sports analogies and the structures you understand with that, and then just trying to draw as many out as you can into your day-to-day and your future life, and go, this second chapter is going to be so good because I've already got the frameworks from that first chapter that was good. So the proof's in the pudding there.
Yeah. No, but well, we've both loved talking to you, Don. A massive thank you for your time. I'm sure everybody listening has enjoyed the wisdom and insight you've shared. Where can people find you if they want to, hear more about Don and your journey and what you're doing? What's the best place to find you?
Thanks for asking. Probably Instagram, Don_Armand, because that's like the personal stuff. It's less focused on one particular thing, and more just me, just every now and again putting stuff up there, plus a load of the podcast stuff and Identity Human. And then LinkedIn, just find me at Don Armand on LinkedIn. that's where I just do little social experiments and put little messages out and see how people react and just learn. So
Yeah.
those are the
And
best ways of getting
LinkedIn's where I saw you recently, and I share your appreciation for old school desks. That's something that I saw you talking about, an old school desk. Yeah, well crafted. I thought, yeah, there's still some of them around.
I'm still looking for the king's throne that goes in there because
I look forward to seeing it. Well, thank you again. It's been an absolute pleasure. You've really, I'm sure, helped a lot of people who are in the process of transitioning out of sport or thinking about it. You've given a lot of fabulous reflection, and we really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Amazing. Cheers, Don. Thank you. Thanks for joining us this week on our ATA podcast. If you found this conversation insightful and it resonates with your journey, please subscribe, follow the show, and stay connected with us for more insights, resources, and information on how we at ATA are supporting your preparation for life beyond the game.